morning, everybody. Welcome to Keys to the Kingdom. I'm Marissa. I hope you guys are having a blessed week. I hope you had a wonderful past Shabbat. And I'm glad to be with you today. We're actually going to be doing two videos today. We're going to be doing our Bible portions. So we're actually starting in the Book of Leviticus today. This is the beginning of Leviticus. We're actually going to be in Leviticus 1 through 5 today. We're going to do the first 5 chapters of Leviticus. And then after this video, we're going to go into our Book of Jubilees study. And we're going to continue reading in the Book of Jubilees. So stay tuned after this video and we will move on with the Book of Jubilees as well. So, yeah, we're in the Book of Leviticus. This is everybody's favorite book, right? All of the laws, all of the specifics of the kingdom and how you were to conduct yourself in Israel. And so we're going to go through these chapter by chapter and yeah, and then we'll get through it all. So that's great. So let's go ahead and get into it. I'm actually going to bring up the scriptures on the screen so you can follow along with the scriptures. And we're going to go through chapters 1 through 5 today. So let's go ahead and get into it since we have so much to cover today. And like I said, right after this video, we're going to jump into our Book of Jubilees study and read probably 5 more chapters in the Book of Jubilees. So stay tuned after this video, and we'll get into the Book of Jubilees after our Leviticus portion today. So Leviticus 1 through 5, let me go ahead and bring up the scriptures here so you can follow along with me. Okay, so basically this is going to start out with all of the laws having to do with the sacrifices and the offerings. Okay, so that's what we're going to see here in these first few chapters. And it says, "And Yahuwah called unto Moshe, and spoke unto him out of the tabernacle of the assembly, saying, Speak unto the children of Yasharel, and say unto them, If any man of you bring an offering to Yahuwah, you shall bring your offering of the cattle, even of the herd, and of the flock." So he's saying, bring it from your cattle. "If his offering be an ascending smoke sacrifice of the herd, let him offer a male without blemish. He shall offer it of his own voluntary will at the door of the tabernacle of the assembly before Yahuwah. And he shall put his hand upon the head of the ascending smoke offering, and it shall be accepted for him to make atonement for him." Hi, Mandy. Good morning. So glad you could make it, sweetie. Good to see you. So it's saying that it's interesting because he says it needs to be his own voluntary offering. In other words, Yahuwah is not, he's a gentleman, not going to force you to do something. But he says, and he shall put his hand upon the head of the ascending smoke offering, and it shall be accepted for him to make atonement for him. Okay? And it says here, "And he shall kill the bullock before Yahuwah, and the priests, Aaron's sons, shall bring the blood and sprinkle the blood around about the altar that is by the door of the tabernacle of the assembly. And he shall flay the ascending smoke offering and cut it into his pieces. And the sons of Aaron, the priest, shall put fire upon the altar and lay the wood in order upon the fire. And the priests, Aaron's sons, shall lay the parts, the head, the fat, in order upon the wood that is on the fire, which is upon the altar. But his inwards, his legs, he shall wash in water, and the priest shall burn all the altar to be an ascending smoke sacrifice, an offering made by fire of a sweet savor to Yahuwah." So there was actually certain pieces of the meat. Basically, just think of it like if you were to go and slaughter so if you were a butcher, okay, and you were going to slaughter an animal, Yahuwah has obviously he has a humane way of doing that, and he also has, there's an order of basically if we have certain parts of the animal that we eat, And there's certain parts of the animal that we don't eat. For instance, we're not eating a lot of the fat. We're not eating a lot of the, a butcher would take out all of the intestines. We wouldn't be eating the intestines. And the butcher's going to, I'm just trying to draw a picture for you in your mind. When you have a butcher, he's taking out the innards, he's taking out a lot of the organs, and you're basically eating a lot of the muscle, okay? And so the directions here is, you're going to take certain parts you're going to cook, and then certain parts you're going to burn up, okay? And it says, and obviously it says the head, you're not going to eat the head. And it says, and of his offering be of the flocks, namely of the sheep, or of the goats, or of an ascending smoke sacrifice. For an ascending smoke sacrifice, he shall bring it a male without blemish. So he's saying if it's not cattle, then he can bring the sheep or the goats for an ascending smoke sacrifice. And he shall kill it on the side of the altar northwards before Yahuwah, and the priests, Aaron's sons, shall sprinkle the blood round about the altar, and he shall cut it into his pieces. So, like I said, he's going to divvy up the pieces with his head and his fat, and the priest shall lay them in order on the wood that is on the fire, which is upon the altar. But he shall wash the inwards and the legs with water, and the priest shall bring it all and burn it up in the altar. It is an ascending smoke sacrifice, an offering made by fire, and a sweet savor unto Yahuwah. And if the ascending smoke sacrifice, I'm just trying to pull this up here. And if the ascending smoke sacrifice for his offering to Yahuwah be of fowls, so basically if it's birds that they're bringing, then he shall bring his offering of turtle doves or of young pigeons. So doves or pigeons were kosher, okay? And they were accepted as an offering on the altar. And the priest shall bring it unto the altar, and wring off his head, and burn it on the altar, and the blood thereof shall be wrung out on the side of the altar. And he shall pluck away his crop with his feathers, and cast it beside the altar on the east part, by the place of the ashes. And he shall cleave it with the wings thereof, but shall not divide it asunder. And the priest shall burn it up upon the altar, upon the wood that is upon the fire, and it is an ascending smoke sacrifice, an offering made by fire, of a sweet savor unto Yahuwah. Okay, so we saw directions for cattle, we saw directions for the sheep and the goats, and we saw a little bit of directions for any birds that were being brought. Okay. Okay, so this is chapter 2. This is laws for grain offerings. Okay? Laws for grain offerings. And when any will offer an oblation unto Yahuwah, his offering shall be of fine flour, and he shall pour oil upon it, and put frankincense thereon. And he shall bring it to Aaron's sons and priests, and he shall take thereout his handful of flour thereof, and of the oil thereof, with all the frankincense thereof, and the priest shall burn the memorial of it upon the altar to be an offering made by fire of a sweet savor unto Yahuwah. And the remnant of the oblation shall be Aaron's and his sons. It is a thing most holy of the offerings of Yahuwah made by fire. If you bring an offering of an oblation baked in the oven, it shall be matzah cakes of fine flour mingled with oil, or matzah wafers anointed with oil. And if your offering be an oblation baked in a pan, it shall be of fine flour unleavened, mingled with oil. And you shall part it in pieces and pour oil thereon. It is an oblation. And just to kind of help you out here, another word for ablation, like if you look in a different, I'm not going to pull it up here. Well, actually I can. If you look here, let's just go to the King James. So instead of ablation, it would just say offering. Okay. Yeah. It would just say offering. Actually, this says ablation too. Thou shalt bring an ablation. Let's see if I have a different. I'm just curious if there's a different translation. Penitent to bring us now of your sacrifice. I think it just means offering, but I was seeing if there was a different word for oblation. Every grain offering. It's, yeah. I'm sorry. Okay, so a sacrifice offering. So another word for oblation would be the sacrifice offering. I didn't want to confuse anybody, and I'm sure somebody was probably like, what does oblation mean? So another word for that would just be a sacrifice offering. It's interesting that they use that word here in the Sefer. Sacrifice offering. Yeah, so you shall bring the oblation or sacrifice offering that is made of these things unto Yahuwah, and when it is presented unto the priest, he shall bring it to the altar. And the priest shall take from the oblation a memorial thereof, and shall burn it upon the altar. It is an offering made by fire of a sweet savor unto Yahuwah. And that which is left of the oblation shall be Aaron's and his sons, and a thing most holy. I think we read that. No oblation which ye shall bring, so no sacrifice which ye shall bring unto Yahuwah shall be made with leaven. So none of the sacrifices that had to do with flour and oil, so baking like a cake, none of them were supposed to be with leaven. They were all supposed to be unleavened. So you're giving a sacrifice offering with no leaven. And remember, leaven represents sin, so that's interesting. Shall be... Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. No oblation which you shall bring unto Yahuwah shall be made with leaven. For ye shall burn no leaven nor any honey in an offering to Yahuwah made by fire. So that's interesting. So no leaven was allowed to be offered on the altar and burnt up. As for the oblation of the first fruits, so as the sacrifice of first fruits, ye shall offer them unto Yahuwah, but they shall not be burnt on the altar for a sweet savor. And every offering of your oblation or sacrifice shall you season with salt. So I always thought this was interesting because he's saying every offering of your oblation shall be seasoned with salt. And I just think that's interesting because what did Yeshua say? You are to be the salt of the earth, right? And I don't think anybody likes a dish without salt on it. Let's just face it. It would be quite bland. You shall season with salt, neither shall you suffer the salt of the covenant of your Elohim to be lacking from your oblation or your sacrifice. With all your offerings, you shall offer salt. And if you offer a sacrifice of your first fruits unto Yahuwah, you shall offer for the sacrifice of your first fruits green ears of grain dried by the fire, even grain beaten out of full ears. And you shall put oil upon it and lay frankincense thereof. It is an oblation or sacrifice. And the priest shall burn the memorial of it, part of the beaten out grain thereof, and part of the... Sorry, guys. And thereof, and part of the oil thereof, with all the frankincense thereof. It is an offering made by fire unto Yahuwah. Mandy says, I find it interesting that it says to offer for a sweet smell. Smell is the most powerful scent, I feel like. It's connected with memory so strongly. Yes, Mandy, that's absolutely right. We've kind of discussed that in the past when we were talking about essential oils and the power of essential oils because of the nerve endings that are in your olfactory bulb in your between your in your nose and your brain. And yes, absolutely, I know what you meant. Sense, yes, I know what you meant. But yeah, and so we have this mixture of food and salt, and then we also have frankincense. And so yes, it is very interesting, and it is very important to keep in mind that all of these aromas were very pungent throughout the entire tabernacle, and all of the people of Israel would have been experiencing those smells throughout all of these sacrifices and offerings. So great point, Mandy. Glad you pointed that out. Okay, so let's move on to Leviticus chapter 3. All right, let's see here. So these are laws for peace offerings, okay? And it says, and of his oblation or sacrifice, or offering. And if his offering be a sacrifice of peace offering, if he offer it of the herd, whether it be a male or a female, he shall offer it without blemish before Yahuwah. So all of the offerings were supposed to be the perfect animal, the perfect grain offering, basically without any blemish. And of course, we see this when we see Yeshua giving himself as offering himself up to Yahuwah as a spotless, blemishless, sinless offering and sacrifice. And he shall lay his hand upon his head of his offering and kill it at the door of the tabernacle of the assembly. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall sprinkle the blood upon the altar round about. And he shall offer of the sacrifice of the peace offerings an offer made by fire unto Yahuwah, the fat that covers the inwards and all the fat that is upon the inwards, and the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them, which is by the flanks, and the caul above the liver with the kidneys, it shall he take away. Like I said, you don't eat those parts of the animal. And Aaron's son shall burn it on the altar upon the ascending smoke sacrifice, which is upon the wood, that is on the fire, and it shall be an offering made by fire of a sweet savor unto Yahuwah. Of his offerings for a sacrifice of peace offering unto Yahuwah, if it be of the flock, male or female, he shall offer it without blemish. If he offer a lamb for his offering, then he shall offer before Yahuwah. And he shall take his hand upon the head of the offering and kill it before the tabernacle of the assembly. And Aaron's sons shall sprinkle the blood thereof round about the altar. And he shall offer of the sacrifice of the peace offering an offering made by fire unto Yahuwah. So basically, peace offerings were to be an animal. Okay? So they weren't flour mixed with oil and frankincense like we saw in the previous chapter. The peace offerings had to be an animal. And the fat thereof and the whole rump, he shall take it off the hard of the backbone, and the fat that covers the inwards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards. And the 2 kidneys and the fat that is upon them, which is by the flanks, and the caul above the liver, and the kidneys, he shall take it away. And the priest shall burn it upon the altar. It is a food for the offering made by fire unto Yahuwah. And of his offering, and if his offering be a goat, then he shall offer it before Yahuwah. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of it, and kill it before the tabernacle of the assembly. And the sons of Aaron shall sprinkle the blood thereon upon the altar round about. And he shall offer thereof his offering, even an offering made by fire unto Yahuwah. The fat that covers the inwards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is upon them, which is by the flanks and the caul, and above the liver with the kidneys, and he shall take it away. And the priest shall burn them upon the altar. It is a food of the offering made by fire for a sweet savor. All the fat is Yahuwah's. It shall be a perpetual statute for your generations throughout all their dwellings, that ye eat neither fat nor blood. So, okay, so he's saying you don't eat the blood, you pour out the blood upon the altar. Okay? The life is in the blood. You're not going to eat that. And you're going to cut out all the fat. So basically that's where we get, the butchering techniques that we have today, where he will cut off all the fat, you drain out all the blood. Hopefully they're doing it correctly. And you're left with the meat that you're supposed to be eating, So when you go to the butcher and you pick up some meat, that's those are the parts that would have been left for consumption. Okay, so okay, let's move on to chapter 4. These chapters are actually kind of small. I wasn't expecting that. So these are the laws for the sin offering, okay? So let's just back up here. So let's just back up for a second. So chapter 1, just to kind of get this in perspective, was the laws for burnt offerings. Okay, so it was seemed to be a free will offering, because it said he will offer it on his own voluntary will. Okay, so these were burnt offerings in chapter 1. Chapter 2, we have the laws for grain offerings. Okay. Chapter 3, we had the laws for peace offerings. And now here in chapter 4, we have the laws for sin offerings. So this had to do with sin. And Yahuwah spoke unto Moshe, saying, Speak unto the children of Yasharel, saying, If a soul shall sin through ignorance. Okay, so this is not a willful sin. This is an ignorant sin against any of the commandments of Yahuwah concerning things which ought not to be done, and shall do against any of them. If the priest that is anointed do sin according to the sin of the people, then let him bring for his sin, which he has sinned, a young bullock without blemish unto Yahuwah for a sin offering. And he shall bring the bullock unto the door of the tabernacle of the assembly before Yahuwah, and he shall lay his hand upon the bullock's head, and kill the bullock before Yahuwah. And the priest that is anointed shall take of the bullock's blood, and bring it to the tabernacle of the assembly. And the priest shall dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle of the blood 7 times before Yahuwah. So we didn't see that in any of the other offerings. The sprinkling 7 times. It just said sprinkle it about the altar. But here we see for the sin offering that the priest who is anointed is going to dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle the blood 7 times before Yahuwah, before the veil of the sanctuary. And the priest shall put some of the blood upon the horns of the altar of sweet incense. So we also did not see this before. There was no blood going on the altar of incense. The priest shall put some of the blood upon the horns, because remember the altar of incense has horns on it, of the altar of sweet incense before Yahuwah, which is the tabernacle of the assembly. And shall pour all the blood of the bullock at the bottom of the altar of the ascending smoke offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of the assembly. Okay, so there's a couple of extra instructions here for the sin offering that we didn't see in the previous offerings. Okay. So he's going to pour the blood at the bottom of the altar of the ascending smoke offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of the assembly, and he shall take off from it all of the fat from the bullock, for the sin offering, the fat that covers the inwards and all the fat that is upon the inwards, the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them, which is by the flanks, and the caul above the liver with the kidneys he shall take away. So basically you're going to take out all the same parts. There's just a little bit extra instructions having to do with the blood. And it was taken off from the bullocks of the sacrifice of peace offerings, and the priest shall burn them upon the altar of the ascending smoke offerings. And the skin of the bullock, and all his flesh, with his head, and with his legs, and his inwards, and his dung. Even the whole bullock shall he carry forth without the camp into a clean place, where the ashes are poured out, and burn him on the wood with the fire, where the ashes are poured out, shall he be burnt. And if the whole assembly of Yasharel sin through ignorance, and the thing be hid from the eyes of the assembly, and they have done somewhat against any of the commandments of Yahuwah concerning things which should not be done, and are guilty, when the sin which they have sinned against it is known, then the assembly shall offer a young bullock for the sin, and bring him before the tabernacle of the assembly. And the elders of the assembly shall lay their hands upon the head of the bullock before Yahuwah, and the bullock shall be killed before Yahuwah. And the priest that is anointed shall bring of the bullock's blood to the tabernacle of the assembly, and the priest shall dip his finger in some of the blood, and sprinkle it 7 times before Yahuwah, even before the veil. And he shall put some of the blood upon the horns of the altar, which is before Yahuwah, that is in the tabernacle of the assembly, and shall pour out all the blood at the bottom of the altar of the ascending smoke offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of the assembly. And he shall take all the fat from him and burn it upon the altar. And he shall do with the bullock as he did with the bullock for the sin offering. So shall he do with this, and the priest shall make an atonement for them, and it shall be forgiven them. And he shall carry forth the bullock without the camp, and burn him as he burned the first bullock. It is a sin offering for the assembly. Okay, so the sin offering for the assembly is going to be the same as the sin offering for an individual who sinned in ignorance. I'm sorry, I had got tongue twisted there. In ignorant state of sinning. Okay, so they're the same. When a ruler has sinned and done somewhat through ignorance against any of the commandments of Yahuwah Eloheu, concerning things which should not be done, and it is guilty, or if his sin wherein he has sinned come to his knowledge, he shall bring an offering, a kid of the goats, a male without blemish. So this is interesting, because this is saying a kid of the goats for a ruler who has sinned, whereas the other ones were a bullock. So a goat, a male without blemish, and he shall lay his hand upon the head of the goat, and kill it in the place where they kill the ascending smoke offering before Yahuwah. It is a sin offering. And the priest shall take the blood of the sin offering with his finger, and put it upon the horns of the altar of the ascending smoke offering, and shall pour out the blood on the bottom of the altar of the ascending smoke offering. And he shall burn all the fat upon the altar, as the fat of the sacrifice of the peace offering. So, just like the peace offering, you burn the fat. And the priest shall make an atonement for him as concerning his sin, and it shall be forgiven him. And if anyone of the common people sin through ignorance, while he does somewhat against any of the commandments of Yahuwah concerning things which ought not to be done, and be guilty, or if his sin which he has sinned come to his knowledge, so if he sins in ignorance, or if he just, all of a sudden realizes that he sinned against the commandments, and it comes to his knowledge, then he shall bring his offering, a kid of the goats. Okay, let me back up here. I think I misunderstood this. I think the beginning part was instructions for a priest. So if the priest that is anointing sin, he's to bring a bullocks. Okay? So the priest who sins in ignorance is to bring a bullock. Okay? And then if the whole assembly sins, it says here, they're also to bring a bullock. So if the priest sins in ignorance, it's a bullock. If the whole assembly of Yasharel sin in ignorance, it's a bullock. So as a community, it's a bullock. But then it says if a ruler, which is an individual person other than the priest, sin, it's a goat without blemish. And then now we're getting to if any of the common people sin through ignorance, it is also a goat. It says offering a kid of goats, a female. So if a ruler sins, he's to bring a male goat without blemish. If a common person sins, like you or me, just a common person, somebody who's not serving as a priest or someone who's not a ruler, he shall bring his offering a kid of the goats, a female without blemish. So that's interesting. So the common person is to bring a female, a ruler is to bring a male, the assembly is to bring a bullock, and the priest is to bring a bullock. Okay, so they're a little bit different here. And I'm sure it's important to distinguish those things. So the common person was to bring a female goat without blemish, and he shall lay his hand upon the head of the sin offering, and slay the sin offering in the place of the ascending smoke offering. And the priest shall take of the blood thereof with his finger, and put it upon the horns of the altar of the ascending smoke offering, and shall pour out all the blood at the bottom of the altar. And he shall take away all of the fat thereof, as the fat taken away off the sacrifice of peace offering, and the priest shall burn it upon the altar for a sweet savor unto Yahuwah. And the priest shall make an atonement for him, and shall be forgiven him. If he bring a lamb for a sin offering, he shall bring a female without blemish. So in other words, if you're not bringing a goat, make sure you bring a lamb, but still a female. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of the sin offering, and slay it for a sin offering, in the place where they kill the ascending smoke offering. And the priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, and put it upon the horns of the altar of the ascending smoke offering, and shall pour out all the blood thereof at the bottom of the altar. And he shall take away all the fat, as the fat of the lamb is taken away from the sacrifice of the peace offering, and the priest shall burn them upon the altar according to the offerings made by fire to Yahuwah. And the priest shall make an atonement for his sin that he has committed, and it shall be forgiven him. Mandy says, can you give an example of the assembly sinning? I'm a bit unclear on what that means. So basically, like for example, if we sin as a nation, okay, if we as a nation come together in agreement, like for example, when the majority of Israel was sinning, God would punish the nation of Israel, not an individual person, because basically the nation as a whole, the majority has decided to sin against Yahuwah. Okay, so basically the assembly would be the majority of the people group. Does that make sense? Sherry says, after Moses came down from the mount. Yes, so, right, that's a great example where you had the majority of the people coming together and worshiping the golden calf. And you had a very small minority that did not worship the golden calf. So, the assembly would be the majority of the nation. Okay. Good. Okay, great. Yeah, so you have like the nation as a whole, the individual, the priest, and the ruler. So those were all four of the different kinds of sin offerings. So you had the priest who could still sin. The priest was not perfect. He had to make atonement for himself. So the priest, the assembly, which would be the nation as a whole, or the majority. The priest, a ruler, which would be the king. And then the individual common person. Individual. All right. now we're on to chapter 5. We're moving through pretty quick here with Leviticus. So chapter 5 is I think this is a continuation of the sin offerings, because there's no title here, so I'm assuming so. Yeah, so this chapter 5 might be a continuation of the sin offerings. Okay, so chapter 5, verse 1 says, "And if a soul sins and hears the voice of swearing." All right, let's kind of go through this kind of slow. "And if a soul sins and hears the voice of swearing and is a witness, whether he has seen it or not, if he does not utter it, then he shall bear his iniquity." I'm going to look at a different I'm going to pull up a different translation here because it's a little unclear what that means. All right, here's King James. Oh no, not that one. Oh, it's exactly the same. Let me pull up the Tree of Life here. Okay, this might be a little bit clearer as to what it's saying. "If a soul sins after hearing a charge of an oath, and he is a witness, whether he has seen or otherwise known, if he fails to report it." So in other words, if someone sees someone else sinning in regards to an oath, okay, and fails to report the sin, he bears the guilt of the sin. That's actually what this is saying. Okay? "Or if a person touches an unclean thing, whether it is the carcass of an unclean animal, or the carcass of an unclean livestock, or the carcass of unclean creeping things, though it is hidden from him, he is unclean, and he will be guilty." Okay, so these two verses are actually separate. If a soul sins, so this is saying if someone, after hearing the charge of an oath, and then someone is, I guess, breaking that oath, and someone is a witness to it and fails to report it, then he is supposed to bear the guilt of that sin. Okay? And verse 2, this is a separate sin altogether. If a person touches an unclean thing, okay, so you weren't supposed to touch any dead carcasses whatsoever. Okay? Or the bodies of unclean animals. Okay? "Though it is hidden from him, he is still unclean, and he will be guilty." "Or if he touches some human uncleanness, whether his filth is by which he is unclean, though it is hidden from him, when he knows of it, then he will be guilty." So this is interesting. This is saying even though a person didn't realize he touched an unclean carcass, maybe he doesn't realize it, it's saying that he's still unclean and he will be guilty, regardless if he realizes it or not. But if he touches human uncleanness, okay, whatever the filth may be, this is saying, though it is hidden from him, when he knows of it, then he will be guilty. So if it's an animal, you're guilty, and you're going to be unclean, whether you realize it or not. But if it's a human uncleanness, if you don't realize it, you're not going to be unclean and guilty until you realize it, basically. That's what it's saying. Verse 4 says, "Or if a person swears rashly with his lips to do evil or to do good, about anything that one might utter rashly by an oath." Oaths were very important back then. You You were never supposed to make an oath. In fact, it was better. Remember what Yeshua said, "Yet let your yeses be yes and your noes be noes." Don't swear upon anything. Don't make an oath. Don't say, "I swear I'm going to do it." It would be better for you if you didn't do it, he says. In other words, this basically boils down to your actions speak louder than words. There's a lot of people who give lip service. They're like, "Yeah, and they use a lot of their mouth, and there's not a lot of action to follow up with what's going on with their lips. And Yahuwah is very it's just not proper for you to give a lot of lip service and no action. Okay? So it says here, if a person swears rashly with his lips to either do evil or good, about anything that one might utter rashly by an oath, though it is hidden from him, when he realizes it, then he will be guilty of one of these. So when you realize that once you've realized that you said you were going to do something and you don't follow through on it, then you're guilty. That's what he's saying. And again, this goes back to what Yeshua said. Let your yeses be yes and your noes be noes. Don't swear upon anything. Don't, just be better not for you to swear at all. Just say yes or no. You're going to do it. And do it. So it will be when one becomes guilty of one of these things, he should confess about what he has sinned. So he's saying that if you swore to do something, whether it was good or bad, and when you realize it and you become guilty of one of these things, that you should confess and say, "I'm sorry," basically confess what you sinned. In other words, confess that you didn't do what you said you were going to do. Then he is to bring his trespass offering to Yahuwah for his sin that he committed. A female from the flock, a lamb or goat, as a sin offering. So we see here a female lamb or goat for an individual person, once again, as a sin offering. So the Kohen is to make atonement for him over his sin. But if one cannot afford a lamb, then he should bring as his trespass offering for the sin he committed 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons to the Lord. One is for a sin offering and the other is for a burnt offering. He is to bring them to the Kohen, who is to present the one for the sin offering first and twist its head from its neck, but not sever it completely. He is to sprinkle some of the blood of the sin offering on the side of the altar, while the rest of the blood is to be drained out at the base of the altar. It is a sin offering. He is to make the second a burnt offering, according to the regulation. So the priest is to make atonement for one over his sin that he committed, and he will be forgiven. But if one cannot afford 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, then he is to bring an offering for his sin he has committed, 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour. So if you can't afford a goat or a lamb, then you need to bring 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons. If you can't afford those and you're just scraping the bottom of the barrel, then you're to bring 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a sin offering. He is to put no oil on it, nor put any frankincense on it, for it is a sin offering. So that's interesting. He doesn't want any oil or frankincense, whereas the other offerings required oil and frankincense. But he's saying because it's for sin, there's not going to be any fragrance. No oil, no frankincense. He is to bring it to the priest, and the priest is to take his handful of it as the memorial portion and burn it up upon the smoke on the altar, on the Lord's offering by fire. It is a sin offering. And the priest is to make atonement for him over his sin that one has committed in any of these things, and he will be forgiven. For him over his sin that one has committed in any of these things, and he will be forgiven. The rest belonging to the Cohen, just like the meal offering. So some of it he's going to burn on the altar, and then the rest is going to belong to the priest. All right, so we're getting into verse 14. This has to do with the laws for guilt offerings. So we saw the laws for the sin offerings. Now these are the laws for the guilt offerings. So Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, if anyone commits a faithless act and sins unwittingly against the holy things of Yahuwah, then he is to bring his trespass offering to Yahuwah, a ram without blemish, from the flock, according to your value in silver shekels, after the shekel of the sanctuary, for a trespass offering. So this says, if anyone commits a faithless act and sins unwittingly. Let's see what other translations, how they word that. Let's see here. If a soul commits a trespass and sin through ignorance. I'm not sure how to interpret these as being different from the offerings we just read about, because we just read about sin offerings. If someone was to sin unintentionally, I'm not sure how this is different. Let's read on, because this is saying, if anyone commits a faithless act and sins unwittingly against the holy things. I don't know. Now these are to bring a ram, according to the value of silver shekels for the shekel of the sanctuary, for a trespass offering. He is to make restitution for what he has done wrong in regard to the holy thing, and is required to add a fifth part of it and give it to the Cohen. For the Cohen will make atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering, and he will be forgiven. Now, if anyone sins and one of Yahuwah's commandments, that are not to be done, though he did not know, still he is guilty and will bear his iniquity. He is to bring to the Cohen a ram without blemish from the flock, according to your value, as a trespass offering. Then the Cohen is to make atonement for him over the sin that he committed unknowingly, and he will be forgiven. This is a trespass offering. He is absolutely guilty before Yahuwah. So this is interesting. I'm trying to distinguish the difference between the sin offerings, but it did say that when someone sins unintentionally. But this is also saying unknowingly. So they kind of seem like they're the same, but it's a completely different offering. It's a ram without blemish. Let's read on. It is a trespass offering. He is absolutely guilty. Then Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, suppose anyone sins and commits a faithless act against Yahuwah by dealing falsely with his neighbor in a matter of a deposit or a pledge of hands, or through robbery, or has extorted his neighbor, or has found what was lost and lied about it, swearing falsely. So sinning in one of any of these things that a man may do. Then it will be, when he has sinned, he has become guilty. So this sounds more like he sinned intentionally. This sounds more of an intentional sin. Because he swore falsely. He obviously knew. Then it will be, when he has sinned and has become guilty, that he must restore what he took by robbery. So this is obviously intentional sin. Or what he got by extortion, or the deposit that was committed to him, or what was lost that he found. Or anything which he has sworn falsely, he is to restore in full and add a fifth part of it, more to it. He must give it to the one to whom it belongs on the day of presenting his trespass offering. So basically, he's to make restitution and give an offering or give a sacrifice, make a sacrifice. He is to bring his trespass offering to Yahuwah, a ram without blemish from the flock, according to your value for a trespass offering to the priest. The priest should make an atonement for him before Yahuwah, and he will be forgiven concerning whatever he may have done to become guilty. This seems like the ram is being given more for an intentional sin. Okay. All right. Well, that's interesting. That's actually the end of chapter 5 here. We got through those pretty quick. So we've seen several different offerings and sacrifices here. And we've seen the differences between just the priest having to make a sacrifice, the assembly, a ruler, an individual, if they were sinning unintentionally. And now this chapter 5 seems to be it says laws for guilt offerings, but it seems like they are having to do with intentional sin rather than unintentional sin. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, unless I'll have to look into that, because this is saying if anyone commits a faithless act and sins unwittingly against the holy things of Yahuwah, then he's to bring a trespass offering. And I'm not sure how that's different from the regular sin offering that we saw in chapter 4. That's let me just get back to my camera here. That's interesting. That's a little bit of homework that I encourage you to do. The differences between chapter 4 and chapter 5. What was the difference between the sin offering for the individual, which was actually supposed to be a female goat or sheep? Okay? And then this guilt offering here seems like it's for another unintentional sin, but it's offering a ram. I think that's something that we should look into further. Let's do a little bit of homework on that until our next video when we get into chapter 6. Let's just go a little bit deeper into what these, something that you should probably study on your own and find out what the differences are in these different sin offerings from chapter 4 to chapter 5. I know I'm going to do that because I'm curious what the difference is. I don't know if it has to do with the wording in the translation or if it's just unclear somehow in the passage, because it seems like it's saying if he commits it unknowingly, that's still an unintentional sin. Or maybe he's just talking about certain sins that are committed, and maybe they committed it, but they did it unknowingly, but they still did it. Because maybe they didn't understand that part of the Torah or those part of the laws yet. Not so sure. I would do it. Sounds like a fun assignment. Thank you, Mandy. I'm so glad you think so. I like to fully understand what I'm reading before I move on, because we're at the end of this chapter anyway. Because I'm just curious if it's unintentional, being that they were just now being given the laws, and maybe some of these people didn't understand the laws yet. I don't know. It seems like there's two different unintentional sins, but there's two totally different sacrifices. The one for the individual under the sin offerings was supposed to sacrifice a female goat, and now this one is asking for a ram. So let's figure out the differences between chapter 4 and chapter 5, and maybe we'll discuss them in our next video. When we get into chapter 6, we'll kind of pick up where we left off, and we'll see what everybody found out regarding those two chapters. So, okay, hopefully we'll get back into this Shabbat. Sometimes my weekends just go too quickly and I'm not able to do a video over the weekend, and sometimes I'll just do them on Tuesday. But we'll pick up with chapter 6 next time, and we'll do probably 5 more chapters in the book of Leviticus, because I really like to take our time and look at these laws, because sometimes you have to go a little bit slow. Mandy, it did mention guilt, so maybe that has to do with a crime. Well, here's the thing, is that it mentions guilt in the title, but I don't see guilt in the actual verses. That's just the title here. It says guilt offering, but I don't see the word guilt in any of the yeah, maybe it just has to do with like a higher crime. Yeah, maybe it's like, so okay, so that's actually a good point, Mandy. Whereas before we saw it having to do with like touching a carcass and touching an animal carcass or a human carcass. Whereas this is like if someone steals or extorts somebody, or, you know, um, swears falsely. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe this is just, okay, these are just different sins. Yeah, so this has to do with robbery, dealing falsely with your neighbor, swearing falsely, extortion. These are greater sins than just touching a carcass. So, great point, Mandy. I think we just figured it out. We may have just figured it out. Because before, in chapter 4, it had to do with touching a carcass unintentionally. Yeah, I think you're right. Great point. These are just a greater sin. That's why you had needed a ram, which is bigger, a bigger sacrifice, because for a bigger sin. Yep. So yeah, so this had to do with like if you hurt, sins unintentionally. But it doesn't mention any sins in chapter 4. It just says unintentional sins for, the priest, the assembly, the leader, the individual. Hold on. So, okay, so actually chapter 4 doesn't mention any sins. It just says a person who sins unintentionally. It's not until chapter 5 that we see the carcasses. It's not till chapter 5 that we start seeing the swearing of the oath or the carcasses. So chapter 4 is actually unclear about which sin. It just says if someone sins unintentionally, if it's the priest, you do this. If it's the assembly, you do this. If it's the ruler, you do this. If it's the individual, you do this. And then chapter 5 starts getting more into specific sins. We're going to have to meditate on that. We're going to have to do a little bit more research. So I encourage you to do that, and then we'll discuss that hopefully when we do our next video and when we pick up in chapter 6. Hope to see you for the next video. Right after this, we're going to get into the Book of Jubilees. Probably like maybe 15-20 minutes after this video, I'm going to start the Book of Jubilees, and we're going to read it. We're going to pick up where we left off in the Book of Jubilees. So hope to see you then, and hope to see you maybe this Shabbat. And I hope you have a blessed week. May Yahuwah bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and be gracious unto you. In the name of the Prince of all Peace, Yeshua. Amen and amen. God bless you guys. See you next time.